In this video, I'll be showing how I like to use Docker, PHP, and PhpStorm. I'll go through installing PhpStorm, setting it up to work with Docker, setting it up to work with XDebug, and how to create a production Docker image. Finally, I'll show how to shut down the Docker services. This video continues from Competent Setup Part 1, where I set up a laptop from scratch. I'll put a link in the description. So let's get started. So in the previous video, I set up my computer with JetBrains Toolbox. Let's use that toolbox to install PhpStorm. Scroll down to PhpStorm, click Install, scroll back up, and we'll give it a minute to install. Now we have PHP installed. Let's go ahead and pin it to our taskbar. Now we're ready to move on to the next part. So next, I want to start coding in PHP, but it's hard to start from zero, and most IDEs give you a template, but those IDEs don't know exactly what I want or how I code. So I've created my own template. We'll start by going to GitHub. And going to my PHP Docker Quickstart. And I'll include a link in the description to this repo. If you haven't already, you'll want to fork this repo. And after you fork it, when you create a new repo, you'll have a new option. So let's create a new repository. And I'm going to use my PHP Docker Quickstart template. And I'm going to call this PHP Demo 1. And what it's going to do is it's going to copy the template so that I have a good quick starting point. So this accomplishes two things for me. First, my project is already in source control. It's there from the get-go, and it has a well-known to me starting point or template. So now I'll go ahead and open PhpStorm. I will not import any settings. So now we'll need to clone our repo, and we'll start by going to GitHub, and we'll log in via GitHub. We'll authorize the JetBrains, close our window, and we will look for our PHP demo. We'll go ahead and trust the project. And now we have successfully cloned the project into our local working directory. So now we're ready to start running PHP from Docker. But interestingly, I haven't started Docker yet, and I want to show you what happens when we try to run Docker, PHP and Docker before Docker starts. So I'm going to open the Docker Compose YAML file. This is our control file. It basically controls how and orchestrates how Docker runs. So I'm going to go ahead and tell it to run. And it says server Docker not found. So what it's telling us is that the Docker server that should be set up inside PhpStorm is not found. So we'll go to services and we'll set up Docker connections. Now, if we click this and we do a refresh, we'll see that we just get a connecting message down here. And if we wait long enough, we'll see cannot connect. Anytime you see that cannot connect message, means your Docker is probably not running. So we'll go ahead and start Docker. I'm going to go ahead and minimize Docker. Oh, it's red. There it goes. And now we'll click, we'll see if we can get it to refresh. We'll scroll over here and refresh. And down here we see connection successful. Now it's important that we name our connection Docker. That's what the template expects. You can correct if you don't name it Docker, but this just makes the world easier. So I'm going to click OK, and we notice we've got some things down here in the left-hand corner. I'm going to come back to our Docker compose YAML. Remember, that's kind of our control file. And I'm going to go ahead and tell it I'd like to run the build services. So I'm going to expand this a little bit so we can see what's going on. If you notice, it's pulling some things. The whole service file contains several services. These would be a service. PHP dev would be a service. Down here we've got a PHP prod as a service. We've got database as a service, and PHP my admin as a service. So it's going to pull all of these services for us and set up our environment to program in PHP. Now it'll take a few minutes the very first time to do this, but once those services are downloaded locally in Docker, once those Docker images are cached on your local machine, it'll start really quick. It'll only do this the very first time you start up a Docker image. So let's give it a minute. So I clicked allow there to allow it network access. You may not want to, it depends on how your setup is, but for the most part, I think Docker is okay connecting back to some other services. So let's take a look here. So there's quite a bit that went on, and I know it took quite a bit of time, but let's take a look at what it did for us. It set up a new network for PHP demo default. It's a little virtual network. It set up a prod server for us, a dev server, PHP my admin, and a database server. So just for giggles, I'm going to go ahead and stop this server, bring it down. And let's see how much time it takes to start it now that it's had the ability to download everything. Let's go ahead. We'll even do a build. And there we go, it started. So it starts relatively quickly. Now what did that do for us? Well, we have a new service out there on our local host. And it should be running at 8088. It helps if you can spell local host. And then we see we have PHP version 8.3.10 available at localhost 8088. Let's see if that's really our code. Let's look in the app HTML index directory, and I'm going to comment out this PHP info line. I'm going to come over here and refresh, and sure enough, it's gone. We'll put a little, the classic hello world. And we'll see how we do. So there we go. We now have our development environment set up and running in Docker. So while we have it working with Docker, we don't have PhpStorm and Docker working well together yet. So to correct that, we need to go ahead and set up some settings in PhpStorm to let it know that we're running from Docker. So let's start with a Control-Alt-S, and that'll take us into settings. And I'm going to select PHP. I'm going to look at my PHP interpreter here, make sure it's pointing at Docker, and that it knows we're using PHP and that we've got XDebug. So it looks like it's already auto-discovered that, which is great. The next thing we're going to do is go down to Build, Execution, and Deployments. We're going to make sure it knows about Docker, and yes, we set that up previously. So it looks like PHP has done a really good job of automatically understanding our configuration. So now we'll go on to configuring or to using XDebug. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to go to our browser and install our XDebug helper. So I'm here in Edge, and I'm going to go ahead and go to extensions, get more extensions here. I'm going to do a search for XDebug helper. And it's this one with the bug on it here. So I'm going to go ahead and get this and add this extension. And that ought to be good. And then I'm going to go to this extension. Let's see, where can I get to its settings? Extensions. I'm going to show in toolbar. And now I'm going to right click on it and I'm going to manage extension. I'm going to click on extension options, and here I'm going to change this IDE key to be PhpStorm, and it'll change to PhpStorm for us. I'm going to change this trace trigger value to XDebug trace, and I'm going to change profile to XDebug profile. I'm going to hit save on each of these and close my extension. I'm going to go ahead and close these things as well. And now we'll test our debugging. So the first thing I'm going to do is come to our index file here and turn on a breakpoint. I'm going to go to our browser, go back to our page, and turn on our debug. Then over in PhpStorm, I'm going to start listening for debug connections. And when I refresh the page, you'll notice it takes a while because it's waiting for that debug step. Over here, we'll go ahead and OK that. We can see that it stopped here at our info. I'm going to go ahead and just step through it. Go ahead and let it run. And now we have our debugging enabled. So I'm going to go ahead and stop debugging by disabling our helper. You can leave the listener on, although I like to turn it off. And if we refresh, we now get an instant response. So the next question is where are error log messages going? So this is a vital part of being able to debug our PHP code, is being able to read our error logs. So if we go to our services, expand our Docker Compose PHP demo here, and the name will always be the name of the project, I believe, or the directory it's in. And we expand PHP dev and click on our little dev service, we can see that our hello error log message is showing up here. So let's modify this so we can make sure this is really what's happening. And we'll come over here, refresh our page, and down here we have our new message. So the next question we probably would like to be able to do is changing the PHP version. So being able to control what version of PHP is running is a critical thing to be able to do, both for debugging and to match environments. So we're going to go ahead and there's two different places or two different ways that the version is controlled. So in our PHP dev service, there's this build and then this Docker file. If we expand that path, we'll see that there are several of these Docker files out here. These Docker files represent the major versions of PHP. That is to say, how you set up each of these versions is slightly different from the other versions. But say that I want to switch to PHP 7, I can select the PHP 7 Docker file here. I can come down here and stop or down my server. And now we've downed the server. I'll go ahead and do my build services again. Now this may take a minute because again we've changed the image that we're using, so it has to download the new Docker image. We'll give it a minute. So now it's downloaded the images for the 7 version of PHP, and we can verify that. Let's go to our browser, reopen our URL, and now we can see that we're running PHP 7.4.33. Now, earlier I'd mentioned that there were two ways to control this version. Let's take a quick look at how that works. Again, I'm going to go ahead and stop the Docker containers, and we're going to go ahead and open, we'll switch our PHP version of the file back to 8, and we'll come over here and look at this. So our PHP 8 dev Docker file, at the top we see this from PHP 8. What that means is that we are basing our Docker image and its modifications on the Docker image PHP 8. And if we go to the Docker Hub, let's go ahead and I will use my GitHub account. Let's do it a different way. Let's use this one. And if we look here in Docker Hub and we type PHP, we'll see that there's an official PHP set of images. If we click on this, and we can see that there are several different versions out there. These are called tags. So if we take a look at the tags, we can see 8.4, alpha, so forth and so on. So to find a specific tag, I will look for an 8 let's say 8.2. So it looks like 8.22, 8.22, and we notice after there are Apache and ZTS. Each of these are slightly different variations on the 8.22. So let's go ahead and make our Docker image 8.2. Now for those of you that are familiar with semantic versioning, you can also type it here. 8.2 will get you the latest version of the 8.2 branch. So whatever the final after the dot, 8.2 will just pull the latest. Now if you need to specify a very exact version, you could do 8.22. 8.2.22. So I'm going to go ahead and pull the, let's do the 8.1 branch. Let's see if that comes up for us. 8.1 point, there may not have been an 8.1, or I'm typing too fast. So let's go ahead and try 8.1. Yeah. We'll go ahead and go back to our Docker Compose. Actually, we can just run our build services from up here. And again, it has to pull down that Docker image, but after the first time it's done it, it will be cached and it will start quickly. So let's give it a minute. Okay, it's pulled down our new Docker images. Let's see what we get on our version. And here we see 8.1.29. So those are the two ways you can control the exact version of Docker. I hope you find that helpful. But now let's do what I really find the most powerful with Docker and doing these type of things. So if you've noticed, we've got this section that defines our PHP development server. Well, let's create two parallel development servers. I'm going to copy this entire service and I'm going to paste it. Let's go ahead and get some extra space here. I'm going to paste it just below the existing service. And I'm going to call it PHP Dev 2. So here on line 104, I've got PHP Dev 2. And up here, I've got PHP Dev. And PHP Dev is running PHP 8. And down here in PHP Dev 2, I'm going to run PHP 7. And now I need to move the port that, the local port that it'll be available at. So I'm going to put it at 8.87. So I like to put PHP 8 at 8088 and PHP 7 at 8087. And you can kind of see how that works. All the rest of this I can leave exactly the same. So I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to bring our services back up. I'm going to build our services. And if I got everything right, because it's already cached, remember we had already run a PHP 7 server earlier. Here we have our PHP 8.3.1 because I put it to the latest 8 branch. And now at 8087 we have 7.4.33. Now the question would be, are these really the exact same code running on two different servers? And let's find out. So let's go back to our index. We'll comment this out and we will say echo I am the same server, and we'll go ahead and put a PHP ver, and we'll go with that. And we'll go back to our browser and let's take a look here. I am the same server 8.3.10, and just to refresh, I am the same server 7.4.33. So the exact same code is running in two different servers simultaneously, and letting us test our code in 2 different versions of PHP simultaneously. That is one of the really great things about running PHP in Docker. And with that, I'm going to bring down my server and end this segment. So you've been working along, creating your code. You've got it all running and debugged, and you've got your error logging the way you want. Now it's time to start looking at how to host your PHP application, how to get it out on the web. Well, the next step is to create a production image. Now there's in the template, there's already a PHP production setup to help you get your PHP prod image set up. Now let's walk through that right quick. Again, just like our dev, it uses a PHP file, or it uses a Docker file, but now it's using the Docker file that's down here in this PHP production Docker files. And this file is quite a bit different than our development Docker files. This one is based on 8, like we expect, but we see this as build. And what you see is a bunch of steps out here to build our Docker image, and we're copying rather than linking in our Docker Compose. We're copying the actual code in, and we're cleaning up, and then we use that base image as what we call our production image. We do a few installs of external PHP libraries, and we copy in our INI, and then from our build image we copy our actual application. So let's go over how to build our actual image and some specific things about that. So again, let's start. We'll let it build our services. And if we look over in our Docker Compose, we'll see that it's running on port 9088. So let's go back to our browser and let's look at localhost 9088. And we see we have our code. But one thing that we'll notice, if we go and change our index, and I'm going to comment out that line and uncomment this line, and I refresh, nothing happens. So remember that it's building a Docker image, and now instead of just linking into the code that's on our directory, it's copying the exact code at the time of build. So we can contrast that with our local host 8088, where as we change the code, it's changing dynamically. Over here, no matter how much we refresh, it doesn't change. Now, how do we change that code? Well, there is a build prod service that will just rebuild that particular container. Let's go ahead and run that. Give it a second to run. Shouldn't take long. And now, if we refresh our local host, it now matches. If we refresh our 9088, our prod image now matches our dev image. So again, just to make that clear, I'm going to uncomment our PHP info, go to our dev image and refresh it. There's our PHP image. Again, no matter how much I refresh here, it's not changing to what our code currently reflects. But if I come over here and rebuild our prod image, now when I refresh, I get what's in prod. So what that's doing, that's building our prod image. The next step is to actually push our prod image up to a Docker repo. So now I'm going to create a Docker Hub image. So I've gone over and I've logged into my Docker Hub account. I'm going to create a repo. I'm going to call this one demo. Let's make it PHP demo 1. This will be a demo repo. and we'll go ahead and create. So now we can see that this is created, but it's incomplete. This does not have a category, doesn't have an automated build, and doesn't really have anything yet. But it does tell us how to actually populate our repo. So here I'm going to copy this, go to our project, go into terminal. So the command is docker login. And login successful. Now we'll do our docker push. And we'll give it a minute to push our new Docker image up to our Docker account. If we switch over to our Docker account, that would be in Chrome. No, it'll be here. And we refresh this page. We now see we have one tag a few seconds ago. And now we can run demo 1, and it runs for us. You can go to a different machine, type that docker run command, and it will run there as well and pull down that Docker image. So now we have a Docker image that has our code out on it that we can use to host at any cloud provider that allows Docker images. And in the next video, I'll show how to do that. For now, let's clean up our system. Let's build our whole services. And now let's down those services to release all those port numbers so that we don't get a conflict with our next project. So one thing to be aware of when you're creating this image section, you need it to line up with the build. It doesn't need to be indented beyond the build. That may not be clear from my template. I hope that helps you build your Docker image. So in conclusion, I hope this helps you use PhpStorm, Docker together in an efficient way. In this video is already insanely long, so in the next video I will show you how to push your Docker image into a production cloud server. I hope you enjoyed the series. Be sure and like and subscribe for the next video.